Good evening and welcome to ECA's monthly national presentation for April. My name is Mark and I am one of several co-chairs of ECA's Education Committee. For the benefit of those who don't already know, ECA's monthly events are rooted in the vision for equitable climate action produced by the U.S. Climate Action Network, whose members include ECA and Dogwood Alliance. This vision document, with a title that has the word equitable before the word climate, includes policy proposals for multiple economic and environmental sectors, including agriculture, electricity, transportation, and tonight's sector, which is forest protection and other natural solutions, such as wetlands and oceans. This evening, I am both grateful and happy to introduce Danna Smith, founder and executive director of the Dogwood Alliance, based in Asheville, North Carolina. By the way, a personal bridge between Dogwood Alliance and ECA is Nico Brown, who helps ECA's other star, which is Jen Chandler, accomplish the work that ECA does. So Nico, if you're on, hi, and thanks for sharing your time with us. For over 20 years, Danna has been a U.S. protection champion, leading campaigns and negotiating forest protection commitments from some of the largest companies in the world. Danna is a leading voice, connecting the dots between climate change, forest destruction, and social justice, and pushing for forest protection at a scale necessary to meet the sustainability challenges of the 21st century. Danna holds a law degree from Emory University. Regarding the Q&A that will follow Danna's presentation, please only submit your questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom middle of your screen. Danna, thank you for joining us and speaking to our membership. The stage is yours.
Oh, great. Well, I'm going to do a screen share here. Let me see. I have to do it this way. Great to be with you guys tonight. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm excited to be here and to share a little bit with y'all for the next 30 minutes or so about forest climate and justice in the US. So I have a couple of slides here and I'm going to pull them up so that you're not just seeing my face, but you actually have some visuals to go along with it. Let's see, present mode. There we go. I think it's working. Awesome. So Dogwood Alliance is an organization that was founded 25 years ago, and our mission is focused on advancing climate justice and climate action and environmental justice through protecting the forests and communities of the southern US from destructive industrial logging practices. And while I'm going to talk a lot about forest climate and justice tonight, I wanted to give you guys just a little kind of glimpse into my world and who I am as a person. This is a picture of me with my mom, my dad, and a friend walking down a dirt road on Defusky Island, just off the coast of South Carolina. And that is across the river from where I grew up in the world's largest wood producing region. So obviously not Brazil, not Canada, not Indonesia, but the coastal plain of the US South. And I was fortunate enough to grow up immersed in nature. I had free range of forests and saltwater creeks at my fingertips, and really feel blessed to have had the opportunity to have developed a very deep connection to nature. And when I look back on my childhood, I have nothing but positive memories of being in the woods and being able to have that opportunity to connect with nature. I also grew up in rural South Carolina during the kind of very beginning of desegregation of the school system. And so as a child, I was very keenly aware of racism. I was keenly aware of how people of color, Black people were treated differently, how white people talked differently about Black people, and how there was this sort of unspoken separation and segregation. And it was really painful as a child. So as I look back on my childhood, that's something that for me is a very painful memory. And over the past decade, I've really been fortunate enough to be able to take these not so positive memories of growing up in the South and combine them with the very positive memories that I have growing up in the South and my love for nature in a way that is really embracing the connections between the two. And I never could have imagined that these two very sort of profoundly different aspects of my childhood would be coming together so profoundly in such an important moment in time that we're in right now. So I feel really blessed to have all of that rich beauty and pain in my childhood growing up that has really informed how I move through the world today. So as we know, we're in a profound moment. We're experiencing multiple global ecological crises. And climate change, of course, is at the forefront of everyone's thinking right now. We are in a race to keep temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. That was a goal that was established in December of 2015 at the Paris Climate Talks. And we know from the scientists, the good news is that we know what we need to do. Like this, it's not like it's like, what do? We have no idea what we're going to do. You know, like we know what we need to do. And there are two things. We need to rapidly reduce and phase out greenhouse gas emissions with a major focus on phasing out fossil fuels. And we also need to actively remove carbon from the atmosphere. And it's this other side of the equation of removing carbon from the atmosphere that is very poorly understood and where there's a lot of opportunity for getting it wrong. I was at the climate march in 2017. I don't know if any of you guys were at the climate march in 2017. And I remember we were in a, you know, it was like so many people and it was so exciting. And here we were at Dogwood. We had our little group there. And we were literally in an ocean of activists with signs calling for phasing out fossil fuels, stop the Keystone Pipeline, you know, defund fossil fuels, you know, and we felt like little fish in a big ocean. And I remember coming away from that climate march feeling like, oh my gosh, we've got so much work to do to make sure that forests get to be a part of the conversation. So fast forward to today and look where we are, like forests are becoming a part of the climate conversation. And our organization has been a big part of really pushing on that. But at the climate march, in the sea of this like space of all these anti-fossil fuel activists, which of course are awesome and amazing, and we know we need them. I saw this one guy cut through the crowd and he had this sign that said 410 ppm and a clock on it with trees everywhere. And it said, time to rewild America. And I literally wanted to chase the guy down and tackle him and give him a big hug and be like, I know what your sign means. I'm not sure anybody else in this crowd really knows what that sign means, but I know what that sign means. And really what it means is this, and you guys probably know, but you know, the safe level of carbon in the atmosphere, according to the consensus of most scientists, is 350 parts per million. And Bill McKibben built a whole organization around, you know, that number, 350.org, trying to keep carbon concentration in the atmosphere at 350. Well, as of 2017, we were at 410. And as of this moment in time, we're at 418 parts per million. So carbon, once it is in the atmosphere, can stay for hundreds of thousands or thousands of years. And so even if we get rid of all the emissions tomorrow, we're still at a level of carbon in the atmosphere that is dangerous for humans. And that level of carbon will continue to warm the planet unless we start actively removing from the atmosphere. That's how we can get down from 10 to 350 within the time frame that we need to do it in order to avoid climate chaos. So forests play a vital role in removing carbon from the atmosphere, and is really understood. So protecting forests is as important and vital as phasing out fossil fuels to solving the climate crisis. Too often we look to things like solar and wind power, technological fixes to the ecological crises that we face. But we need to start coming to terms with the fact that we also need nature, and we need nature to be able to recover from all of the abuse and destruction that humans have caused over the course of hundreds of years. As forests grow, they pull carbon out of the atmosphere and store it. And it turns out the older a forest gets, the faster it pulls carbon out of the atmosphere, more carbon it's able to pull out of the atmosphere. And they store it when they're left standing. But when forests are disturbed, trees and plants die, and the carbon that was stored is released into the atmosphere. So protecting forests is actually a double climate benefit. It keeps carbon from entering the atmosphere, and it actually does the reverse. It removes carbon, the concentration of carbon from the atmosphere. Also, of course, forests, when they're left standing, provide a host of other ecological services. And that leads me to the second ecological crisis that we're experiencing right now, and that is a rate and scale of species extinction right now that has not been seen since the time of the dinosaurs. Scientists are calling this age the sixth great extinction. And the loss of biodiversity is nothing short of an ecological emergency that is on par with the climate emergency. And in fact, right before the Paris climate talks in 2015, the UN Council on Biological Diversity issued a press release underscoring the importance around the world of protecting biodiversity, because they said it underpins all of the ecological functions that will enable forests to sustain life on the planet moving forward and to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. So things like standing forests providing natural flood control. The more diverse, the more healthy the forest is, the better job it does at providing those ecological services, whether it's flood control or water regulation, purification, air temperature control, etc. So it turns out what's good for the birds and the bears and the bees and the plants is also good for climate, is also good for human beings. So while there are forests in the US face many threats, and we could name them wildfire, climate change itself, and tree mortality associated with that, pests, urbanization, by far the leading cause of tree mortality in the US and across North America is forestry, is industrial logging. It's the largest driver of tree mortality across our continent. The map to the left shows that very clearly, with the red being forestry and the other colors being various other things. The map on the right shows the US, and that's the amount of carbon loss, because as I said, when trees die, the carbon is emitted. And the graph on the right shows how much carbon is being lost and by what driver across US forests. And this analysis that was done in 2016 found that logging was the source of emissions 5 times greater than all of the other drivers combined. So if you were to add up all the carbon being lost from wildfire, insects, urban sprawl, wind damage, drought, logging, you add all those up, logging is 5 times that total. So it's a huge contributor to climate change. And these emissions right now in our greenhouse gas reporting, the way that the reporting is being done at the EPA level, are going unreported. You can't look at the EPA greenhouse gas report and find any number that tells you how much carbon emissions are coming from our forests from industrial logging or any of these drivers, because it's a net process. And I don't have to get into the details of that, but it's enough to know that they're not being transparently reported. And I think this is a part of the reason why people aren't taking forests as seriously as they need to in the US. So as I said, the South is the world's largest wood producing region. Most of the forest carbon loss that's happening in US forests, not surprisingly, is coming from the Southeastern region. The rate and scale of logging in the Southeast is estimated to be 4 times that of South American rainforest. There are very little public lands in the coastal plain of the US South, which is ground zero, and logging is largely unregulated on private lands. We've lost tens of millions of natural ecosystems across the South to make way for industrial commercial tree plantations. And you can see from this picture, tree plantations are not forests. They lack diversity. They're poor carbon stores. In fact, plantations can be net emitters of carbon for decades after they're harvested. And we've just seen the collapse of entire ecosystems come in the wake of this conversion of natural forest. The longleaf pine ecosystem, for example, is one of the most biologically diverse in the world. It's also one of the most endangered forests on the planet. It's been reduced to less than 2% of its original. It's an ecosystem that we consider to be on the brink of extinction, an entire ecosystem, not just species, but an entire ecosystem on the brink of extinction because of the commercial planting of industrial pine plantations. So southern forests are also our nation's most diverse, but yet they are our nation's least protected. The South, over decades, has become the nation's sacrifice zone for wood products. And this is a pretty typical image or picture that you would see in the coastal plain, clear cuts, lots of logging trucks. And then there's also a lot of facilities that where these where this wood is being turned into paper or other wood products that is releasing massive amounts of pollution into the air and into the water. This is a map of the Black Belt, what's known as the Black Belt region of the southeastern US. And this region right here is at the epicenter of global industrial logging and is at the center of our nation's wood production and industrial logging. The Black Belt of the region of the South contains the highest percentage of population of Black communities in the country. You'll have some of these counties where the overwhelming majority of the population is Black or a combination of Black and Indigenous. There are very high, disproportionately high poverty rates and unemployment rates and other indicators of socioeconomic stress that are pervasive throughout the Black Belt of the coastal plain. And I think it's important to note that we're talking about the world's largest wood producing region. So if wood production were a way of building thriving rural economies, we wouldn't see the kind of conditions economically that we're seeing in the Black Belt of the US South. It's clear that there is no evidence that the logging industry and wood products industry is creating thriving rural economies. In fact, the opposite is true. And what we also note in the Black Belt is that landowners at the local level are the ones who primarily reap the financial benefits. And when you look at these counties, Blacks own about 1% of the rural land, but can be, again, make up a majority of the population. So there's been a very long history of systemic, discriminatory policies and practices that have restricted ownership on the part of Black and Indigenous people in this region of the US South. So there's deep inequity here that goes along with the industrial logging and the production of wood products that we need to be lifting up, naming, and beginning to address. These same communities are now under increased threat. So not only were we already the world's largest paper and wood producing region, but now this is the world's largest exporter of wood pellets. These communities are being targeted by a new market for wood as so-called renewable alternative energy to be burned in power stations to create electricity in Europe. This is causing more pollution and more forest destruction in communities that are already overburdened by both. And meanwhile, the scientists are warning that burning trees to generate electricity is as bad or worse than coal. It releases more CO2 per unit of energy generated than coal. And plus it has all of these big landscape level impacts in terms of community resiliency and the need to protect forests for their ability to provide flood control and watershed protection. So this is not a climate solution, but it's getting fueled very heavily right now by the European government, who has designated the burning of trees as renewable in the same light as solar and wind power. And our government right now is kind of teeter-tottering on whether or not we're going to take that same path or not. So this is a big, important moment in time. The clear cutting along wetlands, like you'll see here, right along the rivers in these wetland forests that are vital for natural flood control and some of the most biologically diverse forests we have, is rampant and unabated. And this is happening at a time when the flooding in these communities is getting worse. These same exact communities are getting hit hardest by the extreme flooding of the last several years that has been linked to climate change. It's leaving people homeless, jobless, and it's taking people's lives. This is in Robeson County, North Carolina. We worked with the community here last year to try to stop the construction of another wood pellet mill. In spite of statewide opposition, the state issued the permit, making it the 5th wood pellet mill to be built in North Carolina. The poverty rates in Robeson County are 3 times the national average, and Native American populations make up about 65% of the population in this county. Map showing how widespread the wood pellet industry is right now in the South. And this is just the wood pellet industry. This is not, doesn't include all the paper mills and all the other wood processing facilities. But the yellow dots are operating facilities. The red dots are proposed. And we've also well documented a pattern of these very same this industry targeting these very same communities in the Black Belt of the coastal plain. In fact, every single mill in North Carolina, wood pellet mill, has been built in what we call an environmental justice community, where low wealth and predominantly communities of color. So, but communities are fighting back. And, you know, we're working with local communities at the ground level all over the Southeastern US to make sure that their voices are heard and to lift up their stories about the impacts that this industry is having on their communities. This is a picture of Belinda Joyner. She lives in Northampton, North Carolina. It's been all over the national news lately. Is Mike Grunwald, who's a reporter at Politico. And one of the things that we do is try to make sure that we're connecting news reporters to the people on the ground so that their stories can be told. Sitting on Belinda's porch, you can see a smokestack for a paper mill. She's got 3 paper mills within her community, within 30 minutes, 30 miles of her house. One, you can see the smokestack, and then 2 big wood pellet mills also in her community, one that's just a really short drive away. But Belinda's been a really strong voice in her community. She's been quoted as saying that when she saw the video of George Floyd and the police officer having the knee on his neck, that she said that's exactly how they feel about what these industries are doing in their communities, that they can't breathe. It's a huge injustice that's going on here. And then this is a picture of my good friend, Reverend Leo Woodbury on the left in South Carolina, and the chief of the PD Indian tribe, also in South Carolina. And they're doing some amazing work on community-led solutions for forest protection. The chief and the tribe own about 16 acres of land, not a lot, and they're a very poor tribe, they'll tell you that. They have zero interest in logging or trying to make money off of their land. They want to protect it. They want to build a cultural center so that people could come and immerse themselves in nature and learn about the ways of the tribe. And after 400 years of, genocide and cultural oppression of their people, they still hold this incredible value of what it means to be in good relationship with nature. So US and international forest climate policy is an absolute mess on forests right now. We are not getting it right. We're working in the EU right now with partners over there to try to change the flawed policies that are driving the use of forests as fuel. And we're beginning to see some success there. And maybe we can talk about some of that in the Q&A. In the US, our policies around forests are largely focused on tree planting, wildfire, mangrove logging, and expanding wood products as a renewable natural climate solution versus actually calling for the protection of forests from logging. So that's where we are at the national level. Forest protection does need to become a national climate priority. And we need to start thinking about developing policy in a different way. We need to start really centering the needs of the people who are impacted and making sure that their voices are heard and that their ideas about solutions are actually getting incorporated into the policies, because too often we have disconnected to what's really going on the ground, who are up in Washington, DC, or in some office somewhere running models and defining what the policy needs to look like. And there's not enough that's done to really listen to what's going on the ground with grassroots organizing and impacted communities. So last year, we spent part of the year really going and working with frontline communities to hear their ideas, what they want to see in forest policy and policy in general around climate change. And we created this Southern Communities for a Green New Deal platform. And forest protection emerged as one of the biggest issues facing frontline communities of the South. They want to stop the wood pellet and biomass production. They don't want any more expansion of any more wood producing facilities in environmental justice communities. They want to see protection of wetland forests along the rivers from logging. They want to see the reestablishment of and restoration of native ecosystems, not just planting trees and doing more monoculture. They believe that we should be holding the forest industry accountable for its CO2 emissions in the same way that we are holding the fossil fuel industry accountable. They want to see us redirect subsidies from the forest industry to invest in forest protection and in nature-based economies in frontline communities. And they want land reparations for Native and Black Americans. They want to both invest in expanded public lands and in community-owned forests in areas that have been hit the hardest by industrial logging. And they want to see a reduction in wood product consumption and waste in order to get there. Outdoor recreation is something that these communities have really embraced as an alternative, in the same way that with the fossil fuel industry, we see solar and as alternatives to fossil fuel combustion. Communities see outdoor recreation as an alternative pathway to industrial scale logging of forests. Outdoor recreation actually creates more jobs than the forest industry does. It contributes more to the tax base than the forest industry does. And in the southeastern US alone, it contributes 119 billion more to the regional economy. But because these communities, the forests around them are in commercial production and are privately owned, these communities have really been restricted in terms of their opportunity to develop an outdoor recreation economy. And in addition to just the economic numbers, outdoor recreation helps to promote healthy communities. Communities are healthier and happier when they have opportunities and access to enjoy nature. So what you can do, there are three things. And the first, can y'all see this? It's not coming. It's sort of like hard. I'll put these in the chat. But the first is we launched with a bunch of partners across the country. We launched a petition this year targeting President Biden and asking him to hold the forest industry accountable for its climate, biodiversity, and community impacts. And so far we have, I think, 65,000 petition signatures on the petition. It's only been out for maybe a month. Our goal is 75. We might just exceed that this year, but the idea is to get 75,000 petition signatures this year and then do some kind of creative action delivering those petition signatures sometime in the later part of this year. So that's something that is easy that you guys can do, contribute, sign the petition and share it. And I'll put it in the chat box in a minute. The second thing is that the USDA is seeking comments right now on its action plan related to Biden's executive orders on climate change. As many of you may know, one of those executive orders committed the US to protect 30% of US forests by 2030. And one of those executive orders also mandated that every agency consider environmental justice in creating its action plans pursuant to the executive orders on climate change, and that 40% of investments in green infrastructure and green jobs go to historically marginalized communities of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color. So the comments due, the US Forest Service has put out a document, a series of questions that they're seeking comment on. Those are due on April 29th. We wrote a blog that has all the information that people will need in it to be able to find where you submit comments, and you're free to sign on to ours or use any of our language or any of our points to make comments of your own. I can't stress how important this is right now, because unfortunately, although Biden has the right framing around climate change and justice, his picks for the USDA are horrible. Bill Sack, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, and the deputy that he has, Robert Bonney, on climate change, are both notorious for aligning with the forest industry. And you can tell by just the nature of the questions that the Forest Service is seeking comments on, that they are very biased towards logging being sort of framed up as this climate solution. So just to give you an example, one of the questions is, how can we, promote, biomass as renewable energy, and how can we do that in a climate smart way, right? The question should be, should we be even burning trees to generate electricity? Or the question should be, how can we actually get to 30% protection of US forests by 2030? But instead, the USDA is already framing these issues in a way that is sort of framing that's favorable to the forest industry. So it's really that we have a loud voice from the public of people who care about climate change, care about forests, on this at this moment in time. And then the third thing I would just leave you with is, wherever you are in the country, engage in local efforts. If you're in the South and you want to engage with Dogwood, please feel free to, you've got Ernico, you've got me, please feel free to reach out and get engaged, because we need all the support and the help that we can get. And I'm sure that's true also in the Northeast, in the Pacific Northwest. There's lots of active forest campaigns going on across the country right now. So I will leave it at that and just say this is the vision for the future, that we all work together to put justice and the ecological health of the planet at the forefront of our actions and our policies. And that by restoring nature, we can actually restore our relationship and get in better balance with each other as human beings as well. So thanks for having me.
Are we going right to the questions? Or Mark, you're going to make some comments?
No, I think we are going to go right to the questions because Danna did such a good job with the actions we can take and the specificity. So I think we can jump to the Q&A.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much, Danna. That was really a great presentation. I think it was very informative and inspiring. And I am hoping maybe Jen or you could put some of those links in the chat for us.
I'm going to do it right now.
Okay, I'll give you a second before I go on the questions.
And I'll make sure that these links that Danna is providing tonight, I'll get into the bulletin that goes out tomorrow with the recording of this call.
Oh, that's great. Because we only have like 2 days to make comments, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
the timeline is short here.
Okay.
But you can go ahead with the questions. I'm just trying to
Okay.
figure out how to get to the chat box here. There we go. Okay. And should I do this just to all panelists and attendees?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the Biden petition right here. Great.
Okay, ready? Yeah? Okay, we'll start. So first question we had was from Michael Dack, and it was about what about the need for controlled burns to prevent devastating forest fires or wildfires?
Yeah, so first of all, just full disclosure, I'm not an expert on Western forest issues, though I do work with a lot of organizations that do work out west. And from what I understand, prescribed burns are an appropriate mechanism for managing, fire management. What the concerns that I hear from groups out west are around the use of logging as a way of mitigating fire risk. And there's some real pushback from the science community and groups on the ground around the manner and extent to which logging is being used to try to, as under the guise of fire management.
Okay, thank you. This question's from Mark, and he wanted to know if you feel that the US and European politicians are taking concerns from local marginalized communities about wood pellets more seriously.
I think definitely in Europe, that campaign is more mature. We launched the Our Forests Aren't Fuel campaign with partners in Europe back in 2013. So we're almost a decade in. And what we've seen is a couple of things that are happening right now in Europe. One, for example, in the UK, 75%, which is the largest importer and burner of wood in Europe, the largest importer of wood pellets. 75% of the citizens in the UK don't believe that the government should be subsidizing the burning of trees in place of fuel as renewable energy. So we've captured the hearts and the minds, I would say, of the Brits in terms of the storytelling and how much it's really gotten a lot of media coverage over there. The policymakers are slow to follow, but we're hopeful that there have been some things that the UK government has done to restrict subsidies for new plants. And now we're trying to get the subsidies eliminated for existing power plants, such as Drax, that are burning massive amounts of our forests right now. In the Netherlands, 98% of the public believes that the government should not be subsidizing biomass power. And the government just put a stop to new subsidies for biomass in the Netherlands. So there is some movement happening there. At the US level, we still have this designation and a budget rider that designates burning trees as carbon neutral. Fortunately or unfortunately, because carbon emissions aren't really being regulated right now, there's no incentive, if you will, big incentive for utility companies at this point to switch to wood. And there's not a lot of subsidies which would be required right now for massive switch in coal burning or gas burning plants to wood. But that could change, right? That could change if this administration decides that burning wood is better than burning gas or burning coal, which we know from a scientific standpoint, it is not. So it's teeter-tottering at the national level. We do have Michael Reagan, who is at the head of EPA now. He was the head of the Department of Environmental Quality in North Carolina during a major expansion in the wood pellet industry in North Carolina. And while he didn't do enough to stop the wood pellet export industry, he did, under his watch, develop the state's clean energy plan, in which they did exclude biomass. And they made some very strong statements saying that biomass had no place in North Carolina's clean energy future, and that biomass was actually climate friendly or carbon neutral. So we'll see.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Ed Bourgeois. It says, is there a regenerative forestry movement like there is in regenerative agriculture?
I would say it's in its infancy in the Southeastern US. But yes, there is it's a growing part of the conversation. And we're starting with community. We do have several community projects that are focused on regenerative forest, building a regenerative forest economy. So leaving trees standing and doing things like building outdoor recreation opportunities for the community.
But that doesn't include like soil carbon sequestration or anything like the regenerative agriculture, or at least you didn't mention it, so I'm asking.
Yeah, not at this point, but there's a lot to learn, I think, from the regenerative agriculture movement in terms of how some of those principles might be applied in the regenerative forest movement.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Heidi Zod, and she says, please size the problem in terms of contribution to emissions. That is, if logging were stopped, how much carbon will be conserved, not released?
Yeah, so that's a really difficult question to say with certainty. What we do know, based on the numbers that are out there, which are grossly underrepresent, how would I say, they're not inclusive of all the emissions. But the numbers that are out there right now show that industrial logging is equivalent to the commercial and residential sectors combined in terms of the fossil fuel emissions and use. So that's a pretty significant amount right there. But though that amount of emissions doesn't include soil emissions, and there's just not a lot of good data out there on the emissions from forest logging that happen when, from soil. Scientists that have been studying this, however, have said that this is a huge problem because most of the carbon that exists in the forest is actually in the soil. And that some of the preliminary research they're doing on this is showing that the emissions are quite staggering. So what we do know is at least as much emissions as the residential and commercial sectors in terms of their fossil fuel use.
Thank you. The next question is from Steve Simon, and he says that he had the honor of working with Rachel Weber, I guess she's with you, on the drawdown section of the VICA document. The IPCC 1.5 report models low carbon pathways that largely use bioenergy with carbon capture and storage as a major approach to reaching a 1.5 degree Celsius future. Your talk clearly shows why this approach is not acceptable. However, are there any ways that some types of bioenergy with carbon capture and storage may be useful for decarbonization?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I think it's the wrong direction because I think that, and I actually was just reading an article in The Conversation. Are y'all familiar with that outlet? It's a kind of a scientific journal where scientists write articles in like lay people's terms. And there was just an article written about the danger of this net carbon neutral goal. And one of the things that they really lifted up was the danger of things like bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, and how that is a pathway for continuing business as usual. And in particular, as it relates to bioenergy, the issues around how much land would be needed in order for those facilities to actually function. And the replacement, and even the IPCC report did raise some flags about the impacts that such a move would have on biodiversity, for example, because you'd need to establish massive amounts of fast-growing plantations in order to generate the energy and to make the whole ridiculous thing work. The other, I think, big downside is that it's not proven technology. Like, we just don't know if it'll work, and it's very, very expensive. What we do know that works, because it has 300+ million years of evolving, is forests and letting forests grow and letting forests do their natural job of stabilizing the climate. You got to stay focused, I think, on what the most effective strategy is going to be, and not get distracted or waste time, energy, or money on things that we're not sure of and that could cause even more problems. There's a lot of alarm bells going off around those things right
now. And the next question is from Fred Litt, and it is about reducing logging by promoting use of paper from recycled pulp. And it seems like that's kind of a more general question of, your vision. If we reduce logging, how do we reduce demand, I think, for paper products?
Yeah, well, there's fortunately a campaign out there right now, which is being launched by the Environmental Paper Network, of which we're a founding member of, as well as a group called Canopy out of Canada. And it's really all about challenging one-time use paper products and finding more solutions around that. We've all been hearing about the campaigns to stop one-time use plastics, and the waterbed effect of that unintentionally has been to see more and more paper bags, right? Or for people to think that because paper trees are renewable and biodegradable, that they're better than plastic, but it's actually not true. And so there's an effort right now out there to try to raise more awareness about, the one-time use packaging overall and one-time use wasteful products, and really getting people to think about, how much they're consuming, not just switching from one thing to another, but really being more intentional.
And recycling?
Yeah, recycling certainly plays a role. I like to say the 3 R's back in the day, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Y'all remember those? I know it was like grained into your head. Reduce and reuse are the 2 most important. Recycle, the next most important. But in the hierarchy of things, it's really about reducing and reusing. You can only recycle paper so many times before it turns to dust. So, it is important, but it's not, I would say, the most important.
Thank you. Can commercial logging be sustainable? If so, how do we protect communities and our environment from exploitation?
I'm not aware of anywhere on the planet right now where commercial logging is being done in a way that we would describe as sustainable at scale. And I think part of the reason why we can't get there is because we're consuming too much. And so we've got to drive down our production and consumption in order to be able to get to a place where we're treating the forest with utmost respect, that we're literally only taking what we need, and leaving the rest. And I think there are some good models out there. What I see in the world and what the research is documenting is that where land is put in the hands of local communities or indigenous people, that the forest tends to be more intact and more protected, as opposed to land being in the hands of government or in the hands of private individual or corporate owners. So we need to get back to this model of more community forests. And that's what we're actually seeing. I was having conversations with a woman who works with the Black Land and Power Coalition, who's working to try to get more land back in the hands of Black people for farming. And they're also recognizing that there's a forest piece to this that goes along with it. But they're exploring these new models of community ownership, not trying to get land in the hands of individual owners, but lands more in the hands of the community, where it's really being managed in the best interest of community versus an individual. And so I think those kinds of models are really important for us to start building out and experimenting with.
Sort of a follow-up question from Richard Burke. Are there landowners, wood companies, I suppose you might say community organizations also, that you can recommend that ECA should maybe partner with or support?
Gosh, there are, I think the beauty of the justice movement is that in terms of wood products companies, let's start there. I'm not aware of any wood products company out there that we should really be partnering with at this point. I see it analogous to partnering with the fossil fuel industry or the gas companies, right? Like there may be some very small scale local sawmills and things like that that are not the problem. I would say the locally owned businesses are probably the ones to support more than the big ones, but that's difficult in the system that we live in, right? If you need wood, you're gonna go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you're gonna get what they have. In terms of local community and landowners, there are the heirs property owners throughout the South, which are Black landowners. There is Black and the Black Power Coalition. But there are multiple community groups on the ground that lack resources and yet are dealing with these issues every day. And there's not just one, like, that's the beauty of it, right? Is like, there's a diversity of smaller groups on the ground out there. And that's really where a lot of the resources and the partnership needs to be directed, as opposed to at, larger kind of well-known organizations. So getting involved directly in the community at the local and state level, I think, is a really important thing. And we can certainly help connect people based on where they are and, in the world, if they're in the South.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Can people is there a way to contact you?
Sure. I'll put my and Erniko is actually doing a lot of our networking coordination.
Okay.
So she would also be a good person to connect with in terms of direct connection with environmental justice groups on the ground.
Thank you.
And we'd love to continue to partner with you guys at a national level on coordinating strategies and campaigns focused on influencing federal policy.
Okay, thank you. In line with that question, I think we're just about to wrap up here, but Marcia Hart says, for USDA commenting, are bullet point like comments better than narrative? Or maybe just generally, any suggestions about commenting on the USDA policy?
I think individual comment ways better than going on to a group. And to the extent that you can do individual comments, it would be awesome to, whether you want to write paragraphs or bullet points. At this point, you've got 2 days to get it in. And I think anything that you can do and have the capacity to put together would be appreciated. We have some top line talking points in our blog, and we've got our comments are linked in the blog, so you can feel free to plagiarize at will, copy and paste whatever you want, but make your voice heard. That's the most important thing.
Well, thank you so much, Danna. It is 8 o'clock my time, and I think your time too. And so I didn't know if Jen or Mark have something to sort of close us out here, but we really, really appreciate your perspective and your experience in sharing with us, and also the invitation to partner in the future.
Yeah, Danna. Yeah, earlier you had said ECA has you, and I hope you feel that cuts both ways. So again, I just really want to thank you for the important and inspiring work you do and for sharing it with all of us tonight. Even here in the Tucson desert, we have a nearby 9,000-foot forest that can be reached in as little as half an hour, and it's a heat sanctuary. But even that bears the considerable scars of climate change. So again, thanks so much. We hope you will join us for our next event, Tuesday, May 25th at this same time, featuring Brandon Dennison of the Coalfield Development, an organization rebuilding the Appalachian economy as it transitions away from coal. We also encourage you to invite family and friends, and if you were able, to financially support ECA on our website or through our emails. Again, thanks to all and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.